Welcome to a journey through one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded in the American frontier. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this story. We're fascinated to know which corners of the world these dark tales reach, and at what hours they find their audience. In the harsh landscape of 1878 Colorado Territory, where gold fever drew desperate souls from across the nation, a family operated what appeared to be a humble trading post. But beneath their welcoming smiles and warm hospitality lay a darkness so profound that when the truth finally emerged, it would shake the very foundations of frontier society. This is the documented account of the Harwick family and their house of horrors that masqueraded as sanctuary for weary travelers. The year was 1878. And the Colorado Territory was experiencing one of the most intense gold rushes in American history. The discovery of silver in Leadville had created a frenzy that drew thousands of fortune seekers to the Rocky Mountains. Along the treacherous mountain passes that connected the mining camps to civilization, small settlements sprang up to serve the endless stream of prospectors, merchants, and dreamers, heading west with their life savings clutched tightly in their hands. Among these settlements was Dead Man's Gulch, a name that would prove more prophetic than anyone could have imagined. Located along the primary route between Denver and the Leadville mining district, Dead Man's Gulch consisted of little more than a dozen buildings scattered along a narrow valley where the trail wound through the mountains. The settlement's most prominent structure was the Harwick Trading Post, a large log building that served as general store, saloon, and boarding house for travelers making the dangerous journey through the mountains. The Harwick family had arrived in Colorado Territory in the spring of 1876, claiming to be refugees from the economic devastation that had swept through Kansas following the grasshopper plagues of the early 1870s. The family consisted of Patriarch Ezra Harwick, a tall, gaunt man with penetrating gray eyes and a beard that reached nearly to his chest. His wife, Mercy, was a woman of middle years, whose stern demeanor and sharp tongue made her a formidable presence in the small community. Their 3 adult children completed the family unit that would become synonymous with terror in the Colorado mountains. The eldest child was Caleb, a man of 28 years whose massive frame and simple manner led most people to assume he was slow-witted. In reality, Caleb possessed a cunning intelligence that he carefully concealed behind a facade of childlike innocence. His sister Ruth was 25, a woman whose plain appearance and quiet demeanor made her nearly invisible in social situations, a quality that would prove invaluable to the family's dark enterprise. The youngest was Jacob, 22 years old, whose handsome features and charming personality made him popular with both the local residents and the travelers who passed through the settlement. From the moment of their arrival, the Harwick family set about establishing themselves as pillars of the community. Ezra's trading post quickly became the center of commerce in Dead Man's Gulch, offering fair prices for goods and providing credit to miners who were temporarily short of funds. Mercy organized prayer meetings and established a small school for the settlement's children. The family's generosity and apparent devotion to their neighbors earned them respect and trust that would prove tragically misplaced. The trading post itself was strategically positioned at the narrowest point of the gulch, where the trail was forced to pass directly in front of the building. This location ensured that virtually every traveler heading to or from the mining camps would stop at the Harwick establishment, whether for supplies, food, or simply to rest their horses and gather information about trail conditions ahead. The building was larger than typical frontier structures, with thick log walls and a stone foundation that extended deep into the rocky ground beneath. The main floor housed the trading post and saloon, while the upper floor provided sleeping quarters for travelers. What visitors didn't know was that the building contained hidden spaces and secret passages that the family had constructed during their first year of operation, modifications that would facilitate their horrific crimes. The construction of these hidden areas had been accomplished gradually and carefully, with the family claiming to be making routine improvements and repairs to the building. Local residents who offered to help with the work were politely declined, with Ezra explaining that the family preferred to handle such matters themselves to ensure the work was done to their exacting standards. This insistence on privacy allowed them to create their killing chambers without arousing suspicion. The underground complex was far more extensive than anyone could have imagined. The main chamber, accessed through a concealed entrance behind a false wall in the trading post's storeroom, was approximately 20 feet square and 8 feet high. From this central room, a network of smaller chambers and connecting tunnels extended in multiple directions, some reaching as far as 50 feet from the main building. The largest of these secondary chambers had been converted into what could only be described as a dissection room, complete with wooden tables, metal implements, and a sophisticated drainage system that channeled fluids away from the work area. Another chamber served as a storage area for the grisly products of the family's work, while a third had been fitted with restraints and appeared to have been used for holding victims who were kept alive for extended periods. The engineering required to construct this underground complex was remarkable for its time and location. The family had excavated tons of rock and soil, disposing of it gradually over months to avoid detection. They had installed wooden supports to prevent cave-ins, created ventilation systems to ensure air circulation, and even installed a primitive but effective drainage system to handle the blood and other fluids that would result from their activities. The ventilation system was particularly sophisticated, consisting of narrow shafts that extended to the surface at various points around the trading post. These shafts were carefully concealed and positioned to take advantage of natural air currents in the mountain valley. The system ensured that the underground chambers remained habitable and that odors from decomposing bodies would not accumulate to levels that might attract attention. The drainage system was equally impressive, consisting of channels carved into the rock floor that directed fluids to a natural underground stream that flowed beneath the gulch. This system allowed the family to dispose of blood and other evidence without leaving traces that could be discovered by investigators. The stream eventually emerged several miles downstream, where any remaining evidence would be diluted and dispersed beyond recognition. The first indication that something was amiss came in the fall of 1876, when several travelers who had been seen entering the Harwich trading post were never observed leaving. The harsh mountain environment and the dangers of frontier travel meant that missing persons were not uncommon, and initial concerns were dismissed as unfortunate but typical casualties of life in the wilderness. However, as the pattern continued and the number of missing travelers grew, some members of the community began to take notice. Samuel Morrison, who operated a small freight business between Denver and Leadville, was among the first to recognize that something was wrong. Morrison kept detailed records of his customers and the people he encountered on the trail, and his logbooks showed a disturbing pattern of travelers who had reached Dead Man's Gulch but never arrived at their intended destinations. Morrison's concerns were initially dismissed by other residents, who pointed out that the mountains were full of dangers, ranging from avalanches and rock slides to attacks by hostile Native Americans and roving bands of outlaws. The idea that a respected family like the Harwicks could be involved in foul play seemed absurd to most people in the settlement. What made Morrison's observations particularly significant was his systematic approach to record-keeping. Unlike most frontier businessmen who relied on memory and informal arrangements, Morrison maintained detailed written logs of every transaction and encounter. His records included not only business dealings but also casual observations about people he met on the trail, weather conditions, and unusual events. Morrison's logbooks revealed that between October 1876 and March 1878, at least 23 travelers had been documented as arriving at Dead Man's Gulch, but had never been seen at subsequent stops along their intended routes. This pattern was far too consistent to be explained by the normal hazards of mountain travel, which tended to be random and seasonal rather than concentrated at a specific location. The freight operator had also noticed other troubling patterns. The Harwick family seemed to have an unusual amount of merchandise for a remote trading post, including items that appeared to be personal belongings rather than typical trade goods. He had observed clothing, jewelry, and personal effects that seemed inconsistent with the family's stated sources of supply. What the community didn't know was that the Harwick family had developed a sophisticated system for identifying and targeting potential victims. Jacob, with his natural charm and good looks, would engage travelers in conversation, learning about their destinations, their business, and most importantly, what valuables they might be carrying. His friendly demeanor and apparent innocence made people trust him implicitly, and they often revealed far more information than they should have to a stranger. Jacob's method was carefully calculated and refined through practice. He would approach travelers with offers of assistance, information about trail conditions, or simply friendly conversation about their journey. His youthful appearance and genuine-seeming interest in their welfare made even the most cautious travelers lower their guard. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to assess a person's wealth and vulnerability within minutes of meeting them. The young man's charm was so effective that many travelers specifically requested to stay at the Harwick trading post after meeting him, believing they had found a trustworthy ally in the dangerous wilderness. Jacob would often volunteer to care for their horses or secure their belongings, giving him access to information about what valuables they were carrying and how much resistance they might offer if attacked. Jacob had also developed a network of contacts among the stable hands, innkeepers, and merchants in other settlements along the trail. These contacts would provide information about promising targets in exchange for small payments or trade goods. This intelligence network allowed the family to track potential victims across hundreds of miles and plan their crimes well in advance. The young man's psychological profile, as reconstructed from survivor accounts and contemporary descriptions, reveals someone who possessed natural charisma combined with complete lack of empathy. He seemed to genuinely enjoy the process of gaining people's trust, viewing it as a game or challenge rather than a means to an end. This attitude made his deception particularly effective because his enjoyment appeared genuine to his victims. Ruth played a crucial role in the family's intelligence-gathering operation. Her unremarkable appearance and quiet manner allowed her to move through the trading post virtually unnoticed, overhearing conversations and observing the behavior of potential victims. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to assess a traveler's wealth and vulnerability within minutes of their arrival. Ruth's role extended far beyond simple observation. She had become an expert at reading people, able to determine from subtle clues whether a traveler was carrying significant amounts of money, valuable goods, or important documents. She could assess their physical capabilities, their level of alertness, and their likelihood to be missed if they disappeared. This information was crucial to the family's victim selection process. The young woman had also developed a network of contacts throughout the region who provided information about travelers and their movements. Stable hands, innkeepers, and merchants in other settlements would share details about promising targets in exchange for small payments or trade goods. This intelligence network allowed the family to track potential victims across hundreds of miles and plan their crimes well in advance. Ruth's observational skills were enhanced by her training in what would now be called behavioral analysis. She had learned to read body language, facial expressions, and vocal patterns to determine a person's emotional state, level of suspicion, and potential for resistance. This knowledge allowed her to advise the family on the best approaches for different types of victims. The young woman had also become expert at identifying valuable items that might not be immediately obvious. She could recognize expensive fabrics, quality craftsmanship in personal items, and subtle signs of wealth that less observant criminals might miss. This expertise helped the family maximize the profits from their crimes by ensuring that no valuable items were overlooked. Mercy's role was perhaps the most insidious of all. As the settlement's unofficial moral authority and the organizer of community activities, she had access to information about local residents and their activities. She knew who was expecting visitors, who was traveling where, and who might be missed if they failed to arrive at their destination. This intelligence allowed the family to select victims whose disappearance would be least likely to prompt immediate investigation. Mercy had also established herself as a folk healer and midwife, roles that gave her access to homes throughout the region and intimate knowledge of family situations. She knew which families were expecting relatives to visit, which merchants were traveling with large sums of money, and which individuals were traveling alone without anyone expecting their arrival at a specific time. The woman's medical knowledge, while limited by frontier standards, was sufficient for her to understand human anatomy and the most efficient methods of killing. She had studied medical texts and corresponded with physicians in Denver, ostensibly to improve her healing abilities, but actually to gain knowledge that would prove useful in her darker pursuits. Mercy's reputation as a healer also provided her with access to drugs and chemicals that would be useful for incapacitating victims. She had legitimate reasons to possess laudanum, chloroform, and other substances that could be used to render people unconscious. Her medical practice also gave her cover for possessing surgical instruments and anatomical knowledge that would be essential for the family's body parts trade. The woman's psychological profile reveals someone who derived satisfaction from wielding power over life and death. Her role as a healer allowed her to experience the gratitude and dependence of her patients, while her secret activities as a killer gave her the ultimate expression of control over human life. This duality appears to have been psychologically satisfying in a way that neither role alone could have provided. Ezra served as the operation's strategic mastermind, using his position as a respected businessman to deflect suspicion and provide cover for the family's activities. His trading post gave him legitimate reasons to possess a wide variety of goods, making it easy to dispose of items taken from victims without arousing suspicion. He also maintained relationships with corrupt officials and criminal contacts in Denver, who could help dispose of valuable items that might be traced back to missing persons. Ezra's business acumen extended to the criminal aspects of the family's operation. He had established relationships with medical schools and private collectors who were willing to pay substantial sums for anatomical specimens, no questions asked. The demand for such materials was high in the late 19th century, as medical education was expanding rapidly and legal sources of cadavers were limited. The patriarch had also developed a sophisticated money laundering operation that allowed the family to convert stolen goods and cash into legitimate assets. He maintained accounts at banks in multiple cities under various names, and he had invested the proceeds of their crimes in real estate and business ventures that provided both income and respectability. Ezra's network of criminal contacts extended throughout the American West and even to major cities in the East. He had relationships with fences who could dispose of stolen goods, corrupt officials who could provide protection from investigation, and other criminal enterprises that could share information and resources. This network made the family's operation far more sophisticated and dangerous than it would have been in isolation. The patriarch's psychological profile reveals a calculating intelligence that viewed crime as a business opportunity rather than a moral transgression. He approached murder and robbery with the same methodical planning and attention to detail that legitimate businessmen applied to their enterprises. This business-like approach made the family's crimes more efficient and harder to detect than the impulsive violence that characterized most frontier criminals. Caleb's role was perhaps the most physically demanding and psychologically disturbing. His massive strength and apparent simple-mindedness made him the perfect enforcer for the family's operation. Victims who might have been suspicious of the other family members were often completely at ease around Caleb, viewing him as harmless and even protective. In reality, Caleb was responsible for the actual killing of most victims. His strength allowed him to overpower even large, strong men with ease, while his facade of innocence meant that victims rarely saw the attack coming. He had developed efficient methods of killing that minimized noise and struggle, crucial factors in maintaining the family's cover. Caleb's apparent mental limitations were largely an act, carefully maintained to deflect suspicion and provide psychological cover for his violent actions. In reality, he possessed above-average intelligence and was capable of sophisticated planning and execution. His ability to maintain this facade for years demonstrates remarkable self-control and acting ability. The young man's strength was legendary in the region, and he was often called upon to help with heavy lifting and construction projects. This reputation for helpfulness and physical capability made him a welcome presence in the community, and helped maintain the family's positive image. Few people suspected that the same strength that made him so useful could be turned to deadly purposes. Caleb's psychological profile reveals someone who found satisfaction in the exercise of physical dominance over others. His role as the family's killer allowed him to express violent impulses while maintaining the protection of his family and their criminal enterprise. The combination of physical power and psychological cunning made him perhaps the most dangerous member of the family. The family's method of operation was as simple as it was effective. Travelers who met their criteria for victimization would be invited to stay overnight at the trading post, often at discounted rates that made the offer seem like genuine hospitality. During the evening, they would be served food and drink that had been drugged with laudanum or other substances that would render them unconscious. The drugging process was carefully calibrated based on the victim's size, apparent health, and level of alertness. Mercy had become expert at determining the proper dosage to render someone unconscious without killing them immediately, as the family preferred to have their victims alive when they were moved to the underground chambers. The drugs used were carefully selected for their effectiveness and availability. Laudanum was the most common choice because it was widely available for legitimate medical purposes, and its effects were well understood. Chloroform was sometimes used for victims who seemed particularly alert or suspicious, as it acted more quickly than laudanum, but required more careful handling. The family had also experimented with various plant-based toxins that could be obtained from local flora. Some of these substances were more difficult to detect than commercial drugs, and could be explained as accidental poisoning from contaminated food. This diversity of methods made it difficult for investigators to identify a consistent pattern in the deaths. Once the victims were incapacitated, they would be moved to one of the hidden chambers beneath the trading post, where they would be killed and their bodies systematically dismembered. The family had constructed an elaborate system of underground rooms and passages that allowed them to dispose of remains without detection, while their victims' belongings were carefully sorted and either sold through legitimate channels or traded to criminal contacts in distant cities. The killing process itself was methodical and efficient. Victims would typically be restrained in one of the underground chambers and allowed to regain consciousness before being killed. This served multiple purposes. It allowed the family to interrogate victims about hidden valuables or important information. It satisfied their psychological need to see their victims' fear and suffering, and it ensured that the victims were fully aware of their fate before dying. The interrogation process was systematic and thorough. The family had developed techniques for extracting information about hidden assets, business connections, and family relationships that might be useful for future crimes. They also gathered intelligence about law enforcement activities, travel patterns, and other information that could help them avoid detection. The actual killing methods varied depending on the family member involved and the specific circumstances. Caleb typically used his bare hands or simple tools like hammers or knives. Mercy sometimes employed medical knowledge to kill victims in ways that would be difficult to detect if the bodies were ever discovered. Ezra and Ruth were less directly involved in the killing, but participated in the planning and disposal phases. The most disturbing aspect of the Harwick family's operation was their treatment of the human remains. Evidence discovered later suggested that they had been selling bones and other body parts to medical schools and private collectors who were willing to pay substantial sums for anatomical specimens, no questions asked. The demand for such materials was high in the late 19th century, as medical education was expanding rapidly and legal sources of cadavers were limited. Mercy Harwick, who claimed to have some medical knowledge, appears to have been responsible for the preparation and preservation of these grisly commodities. She had converted one of the underground chambers into a crude but functional dissection room, complete with tables, tools, and chemical baths for preserving specimens. The family's correspondence, discovered years later, included letters to medical institutions and private collectors offering various anatomical specimens at competitive prices. The preservation process was sophisticated for its time and location. Mercy had obtained chemicals and equipment through her medical contacts, claiming to need them for her healing practice. She had developed techniques for cleaning and articulating skeletons, preserving organs in alcohol solutions, and preparing anatomical displays that could be sold to medical schools or private collectors. The financial aspects of this trade were substantial. A complete human skeleton could sell for the equivalent of several $1,000s in today's currency, while individual bones, organs, and anatomical preparations commanded prices that made the trade extremely profitable. The family's records showed that they had generated more income from the sale of body parts than from robbing their victims of their money and possessions. The market for human remains was larger and more sophisticated than most people realized. Medical schools throughout the country were desperate for anatomical specimens, and legal sources were severely limited. Private collectors, including wealthy individuals with interests in medicine or natural history, were willing to pay premium prices for high-quality specimens. The family had developed relationships with buyers in Denver, Chicago, St. Louis, and even New York and Boston. They used the expanding railroad network to ship their products across the country, often disguising them as legitimate medical supplies or scientific specimens. This distribution network allowed them to avoid saturating any single market and reduce the risk of detection. The preparation of specimens required considerable skill and knowledge. Mercy had taught herself anatomy, chemistry, and preservation techniques through correspondence with medical professionals and study of technical texts. Her work was of sufficiently high quality that buyers rarely questioned the source of her specimens, assuming they came from legitimate medical sources. The psychological dynamics within the Harwick family were complex and deeply disturbing. Unlike many criminal families where one member dominates the others, the Harwicks appeared to operate as a true collective, with each member contributing their unique skills to the enterprise. This collaborative approach made them far more effective than they would have been individually, and it also made their crimes more difficult to detect and investigate. The family's relationship dynamic was based on mutual dependence and shared guilt. Each member possessed skills that were crucial to the operation's success, and each had committed acts that bound them to the others through complicity. This created a powerful incentive for loyalty and secrecy that helped maintain their cover for years. Ezra's role as the family patriarch gave him ultimate authority over their operations, but he relied heavily on the specialized skills of his wife and children. Mercy's medical knowledge and Ruth's observational abilities were crucial to the success of their crimes, while Jacob's charm and Caleb's physical strength provided the means to lure and overpower victims. The family also shared a common worldview that dehumanized their victims and justified their actions. They viewed travelers as resources to be harvested rather than as human beings deserving of life and dignity. This perspective was reinforced through years of shared criminal activity and mutual rationalization of their behavior. The family's decision-making process was democratic in a disturbing way. Major decisions about potential victims, operational changes, and strategic planning were made collectively, with each member having input based on their area of expertise. This collaborative approach ensured that all aspects of their operation were carefully considered, and that no single person bore the full psychological burden of their crimes. The family's success bred confidence, and confidence bred expansion. By 1877, they had begun to establish relationships with similar criminal enterprises in other parts of the territory, creating a network that could share information about potential victims and coordinate the disposal of stolen goods. This network included corrupt officials, criminal gangs, and other families who had discovered the profitability of preying on travelers in remote areas. The criminal network that the Harwicks had helped establish extended across multiple territories and states. They maintained correspondence with similar operations in Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico, sharing information about law enforcement activities, profitable trade routes, and effective criminal techniques. This network represented one of the earliest examples of organized crime in the American West. The network also included legitimate businesses that served as fronts for criminal activity. General stores, saloons, and boarding houses throughout the region were owned or controlled by members of the network, creating a web of criminal enterprises that could support and protect each other. This infrastructure made it possible for criminals to operate across vast distances while maintaining cover and avoiding detection. The network's communication system was sophisticated for its time, utilizing the expanding telegraph system, postal service, and informal networks of travelers and merchants. Messages were often coded or disguised as legitimate business correspondence to avoid detection by law enforcement. The network also maintained safe houses and supply caches that could be used by members traveling between operations. The financial aspects of the network were equally sophisticated. The various criminal enterprises shared resources, coordinated the disposal of stolen goods, and even provided mutual insurance against losses due to law enforcement action. This cooperation made each individual operation more profitable and secure than it would have been in isolation. The beginning of the end for the Harwick family came in the spring of 1878, when they made the fatal mistake of targeting the wrong victim. Dr. Harrison Blackwood was a prominent physician from Boston who had traveled west to investigate investment opportunities in the mining industry. Unlike the typical prospectors and small-time merchants who usually fell victim to the family, Dr. Blackwood was a man of considerable wealth and influence, with powerful friends who would not accept his disappearance without a thorough investigation. Dr. Blackwood had arrived at the Harwick trading post on April 15, 1878, carrying letters of introduction from several prominent businessmen and a substantial sum of money for potential investments. Jacob Harwick had engaged him in conversation and learned about his mission, his wealth, and his travel plans. The doctor had mentioned that he was traveling alone and that his next stop would be Leadville, where he planned to spend several weeks evaluating mining operations. The doctor's background made him an attractive target for the family. He was carrying approximately $50,000 in cash and bank drafts, an enormous sum for the time. He was traveling alone and had no specific schedule that would cause immediate concern if he failed to arrive at his destination. Most importantly, he had told Jacob that he was conducting his investigation secretly, hoping to identify investment opportunities before they became widely known. Dr. Blackwood's mission was part of a larger investment strategy by a group of Boston financiers who were seeking to diversify their holdings by investing in Western mining operations. The doctor had been chosen for this mission because of his scientific background and his reputation for careful analysis. His associates trusted his judgment and were prepared to invest substantial sums based on his recommendations. The doctor's travel plans had been carefully coordinated with his business partners in Boston. He was expected to send regular telegrams reporting on his progress and findings. These communications were not just courtesy updates, but were crucial for coordinating the timing of their investments with market conditions and other business activities. What the family didn't know was that Dr. Blackwood had arranged to send regular telegrams to his business partners in Boston, updating them on his progress and findings. When these communications suddenly stopped, his associates became concerned and began making inquiries through their network of contacts in Colorado Territory. Dr. Blackwood's business partners were not ordinary merchants or investors. They were members of Boston's financial elite, with connections to powerful politicians and law enforcement officials. When their inquiries to local authorities in Colorado produced unsatisfactory results, they hired Pinkerton detectives to conduct a thorough investigation. The Boston financiers had significant political influence and were not accustomed to being ignored by government officials. When their initial inquiries were dismissed or handled casually by local authorities, they used their connections to pressure federal officials to take action. This pressure eventually resulted in the assignment of experienced federal investigators to the case. The investigation that followed was far more thorough and persistent than anything the Harwick family had previously encountered. Dr. Blackwood's associates had hired Pinkerton detectives to trace his movements, and these professional investigators brought resources and expertise that local law enforcement lacked. They systematically retraced the doctor's route, interviewing everyone who had seen him and documenting his movements with meticulous care. The Pinkerton detectives employed investigative techniques that were advanced for their time. They used telegraph networks to coordinate their efforts across multiple locations, maintained detailed written records of all interviews and observations, and employed scientific methods to analyze physical evidence. This systematic approach contrasted sharply with the more casual investigative methods that were typical of frontier law enforcement. The lead investigator was Detective Marcus Sullivan, a veteran of the Civil War, who had joined the Pinkerton Agency after the conflict ended. Sullivan had experience investigating complex criminal cases and was known for his persistence and attention to detail. He brought a team of experienced operatives who could conduct simultaneous investigations in multiple locations. Sullivan's team included specialists in different aspects of criminal investigation. One detective focused on financial crimes and was expert at tracing stolen money and goods through various markets and institutions. Another specialized in interviewing witnesses and had developed techniques for extracting reliable information from reluctant or frightened sources. A third member of the team was skilled in physical evidence analysis and crime scene investigation. The Pinkerton investigation quickly focused on Dead Man's Gulch, where multiple witnesses confirmed that Dr. Blackwood had arrived at the Harwick trading post but had never been seen leaving. When confronted with this evidence, the family claimed that the doctor had departed early in the morning, before most people were awake, and had mentioned his intention to take a different route to Leadville than the one he had originally planned. However, the Pinkerton detectives were not satisfied with this explanation. They had discovered that Dr. Blackwood's horse and personal effects had been seen in the possession of various people in the area, all of whom claimed to have purchased them legitimately from Ezra Harwick. When pressed for details about these transactions, Harwick's stories contained numerous inconsistencies that raised further suspicions. The detectives also discovered that several items belonging to Dr. Blackwood had appeared in Denver pawn shops and second-hand stores within days of his disappearance. The sellers were traced back to known associates of the Harwick family, creating a chain of evidence that pointed directly to the trading post as the source of the stolen goods. The investigation revealed that the Harwick family had been unusually active in disposing of goods immediately after Dr. Blackwood's disappearance. They had made several trips to Denver and other cities, carrying large quantities of merchandise that they claimed to be trading for supplies. However, the timing and nature of these trips suggested that they were actually disposing of evidence from their latest crime. The investigation intensified when the detectives discovered that Dr. Blackwood was not the only traveler to have disappeared after visiting the Harwick trading post. Their systematic inquiry revealed a pattern of missing persons that stretched back more than 2 years, involving dozens of individuals who had last been seen at the family's establishment. Detective Sullivan's team had compiled a list of 43 individuals who had disappeared after visiting the Harwick trading post. The list included merchants, prospectors, investors, and travelers from across the United States and several foreign countries. The pattern was so clear and consistent that it could not be explained by coincidence or the normal dangers of frontier travel. The detectives also discovered that the Harwick family had been unusually successful in their business dealings, accumulating wealth that seemed disproportionate to the income that could be generated by a remote trading post. Bank records showed large cash deposits and investments that could not be explained by legitimate business activities. The financial investigation revealed that the family had been depositing large sums of money in banks throughout Colorado and neighboring territories. The amounts and timing of these deposits correlated closely with the disappearances of wealthy travelers, providing strong circumstantial evidence of their criminal activities. As pressure mounted, the Harwick family began to make mistakes. Ruth was observed burning papers behind the trading post, and several residents reported seeing the family members engaged in suspicious nighttime activities. Most damaging of all, Caleb was overheard making threatening remarks about the investigators, comments that revealed far more intelligence and cunning than his simple-minded facade would suggest. The family's behavior became increasingly erratic as the investigation continued. Ezra began drinking heavily and was observed having heated arguments with his wife and children. Mercy became withdrawn and suspicious, refusing to treat patients who had previously relied on her medical services. Jacob's usual charm gave way to nervous agitation, and he was seen arguing with local residents who asked questions about the investigation. The stress of the investigation was clearly taking its toll on the family's carefully maintained facade. Neighbors reported that the family members seemed to be constantly watching each other in the surrounding area, as if expecting an attack at any moment. The trading post's business declined as travelers began to avoid the establishment, having heard rumors about the investigation. The breakthrough in the case came when one of the Pinkerton detectives discovered the entrance to the underground chambers beneath the trading post. The detective had been conducting a thorough search of the building when he noticed that the stone foundation extended much deeper than necessary for a structure of that size. Further investigation revealed a concealed entrance that led to a network of rooms and passages that had been carefully hidden from casual observation. Detective Sullivan had noticed inconsistencies in the building's construction during his initial examination of the trading post. The foundation was far more extensive than necessary for a building of that size, and there were areas where the floor seemed to have been recently disturbed. His suspicions were confirmed when he discovered loose stones in the foundation wall that concealed the entrance to the underground complex. The discovery of the hidden entrance required careful planning and execution. The detectives had to find a way to investigate the underground chambers without alerting the family to their discovery. They waited until the family was away from the trading post before beginning their exploration of the hidden areas. What the investigators found in those underground chambers defied description. The rooms contained the remains of dozens of human beings in various stages of decomposition and dismemberment. Some bodies had been reduced to skeletons, while others showed evidence of recent death. The dissection room contained tools, chemicals, and partially prepared specimens that revealed the full scope of the family's horrific enterprise. The main chamber contained the remains of at least 30 individuals, arranged on wooden shelves like merchandise in a warehouse. The bodies had been systematically dismembered and sorted, with bones separated from soft tissue and organs preserved in chemical solutions. The level of organization and efficiency was both impressive and horrifying. The dissection room was equipped with medical instruments, chemical baths, and anatomical charts that revealed the sophisticated nature of the family's body parts trade. Correspondence found in the room showed that they had been selling specimens to medical schools in Denver, Chicago, and even as far away as New York and Boston. The preservation techniques used by the family were remarkably advanced for their time and location. They had developed methods for cleaning and articulating skeletons, preserving organs in alcohol solutions, and preparing anatomical displays that could be sold to medical schools or private collectors. The quality of their work was sufficiently high that buyers rarely questioned the source of the specimens. The evidence also included detailed records that the family had kept of their victims and their crimes. These documents, written primarily in Mercy's careful handwriting, contained information about each victim, the circumstances of their death, the disposal of their remains, and the profits generated from the sale of their belongings and body parts. The records revealed that the family had killed at least 47 people over a period of nearly 3 years, generating profits equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's currency. The record-keeping was meticulous and businesslike, treating murder as a commercial enterprise. Each victim was assigned a number and described in terms of their physical characteristics, the valuables they carried, and the market value of their remains. The records showed that the family had generated more income from the sale of body parts than from traditional robbery. The records also revealed the extent of the family's criminal network and their connections to other illegal enterprises throughout the region. The documents contained references to contacts in multiple states and territories, suggesting that the Harwick operation was part of a much larger criminal organization. The discovery of the underground chambers and their grisly contents created a sensation that reverberated throughout Colorado Territory and beyond. Newspaper accounts of the crimes were published across the nation, describing the Harwick family as monsters who had perverted the sacred traditions of frontier hospitality for their own evil purposes. The New York Times published a front-page story describing the crimes as an atrocity that defies comprehension, and calling for federal intervention to ensure that justice was served. The Chicago Tribune compared the family to sack ghouls and grave robbers and demanded that they face the full penalty of the law. Even international newspapers picked up the story, with the London Times describing the case as evidence of the lawlessness that characterized the American frontier. The media coverage was unprecedented for a frontier crime story. The combination of mass murder, body trafficking, and the violation of hospitality traditions captured the public imagination in a way that typical frontier violence did not. The story was covered not just in newspapers, but also in magazines, books, and even early forms of popular entertainment. The family was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, but their trial would never take place. On the night before their scheduled arraignment, a group of vigilantes stormed the jail where they were being held and dragged them from their cells. What happened next became the subject of legend and speculation that continues to this day. The vigilante group was composed of approximately 20 men, including several whose relatives had been among the Harwick family's victims. They had been planning their action for days, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. The local sheriff and his deputies were mysteriously absent from the jail that night, leading to speculation that they had been complicit in the vigilante action. The vigilantes had carefully planned their operation to avoid interference from law enforcement or federal authorities. They had coordinated their timing to coincide with a period when most officials would be away from town, and they had taken steps to ensure that their identities would remain secret. According to some accounts, the vigilantes hanged the entire family from a large cottonwood tree that stood near the entrance to Deadman's Gulch. Other versions of the story claim that they were burned alive in their own trading post, which was indeed destroyed by fire on the same night. Still other accounts suggest that the family was taken to a remote location in the mountains and subjected to tortures that mirrored the suffering they had inflicted on their victims. The most detailed account of the vigilante action comes from a letter written by one of the participants, discovered in a private collection in 1924. According to this account, the family was taken to the underground chambers where they had committed their crimes and forced to experience the same terror that their victims had endured. The letter describes how each family member was killed in the same manner that they had used to murder their victims, with their bodies then dismembered and scattered in the mountains. The letter provides disturbing details about the vigilantes' methods and motivations. The writer describes a deliberate attempt to make the family's deaths as prolonged and terrifying as possible, viewing this as appropriate justice for their crimes. The account suggests that the vigilantes were not simply seeking revenge, but were attempting to send a message to other potential criminals. The truth about the Harwick family's fate may never be known, as the vigilantes who carried out their execution maintained strict silence about the details of that night. What is certain is that all 4 family members died violently, and their bodies were never recovered for proper burial. The trading post was completely destroyed, and the underground chambers were filled with rocks and debris to prevent them from becoming a macabre tourist attraction. The destruction of the trading post was thorough and systematic. The vigilantes not only burned the building but also took steps to obliterate any trace of the underground chambers. They filled the chambers with rocks and debris, sealed the entrances, and even diverted the stream that had been used for drainage to flood the area. The aftermath of the Harwick case had profound implications for the development of Colorado Territory and the broader American West. The revelation that a family had been systematically murdering travelers for profit highlighted the vulnerabilities of frontier society and the need for better law enforcement and communication systems. The territorial government responded to the crisis by establishing new law enforcement agencies and improving communication networks between remote settlements. The Colorado Rangers were formed as an elite law enforcement unit specifically tasked with investigating crimes in remote areas and coordinating with federal authorities when necessary. The case also had a significant impact on the mining industry in Colorado. Many potential investors and workers were deterred by the news of the murders, leading to a temporary decline in migration to the territory. The territorial government was forced to implement new security measures and establish better coordination between local law enforcement agencies to restore confidence in the safety of travel through the region. Mining companies began providing armed escorts for their employees, and establishing secure transportation routes between mining camps and major cities. The cost of these security measures was substantial, but it was considered necessary to maintain the flow of workers and investment capital that the industry required. The psychological impact on the residents of Dead Man's Gulch was devastating. The revelation that their respected neighbors had been mass murderers shattered the community's sense of security and trust. Many families left the settlement, and within a year it had become virtually abandoned. The few remaining residents eventually renamed the location Peaceful Valley, hoping to escape the stigma associated with its former name. The abandonment of Dead Man's Gulch was not just psychological, but also economic. The trading post had been the economic center of the settlement, and its destruction left the remaining residents without a viable means of livelihood. The stigma associated with the location made it difficult to attract new businesses or residents, leading to a cycle of decline that ultimately resulted in the settlement's complete abandonment. The investigation of the Harwick crimes also revealed the existence of a broader network of criminal enterprises that had been operating throughout the American West. The family's correspondence and records contained references to similar operations in other territories, suggesting that the systematic murder of travelers was more widespread than anyone had previously suspected. Federal authorities launched investigations in several other locations, leading to the discovery of additional murder sites and the arrest of other criminal families. These investigations revealed that the Harwicks had been part of a loose confederation of criminals who shared information about potential victims and coordinated the disposal of stolen goods across vast distances. The network included operations in Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, and Montana, with some evidence suggesting connections to criminal enterprises as far away as California and Texas. The scope of this network was unprecedented in American criminal history and required a coordinated federal response to dismantle effectively. The federal investigation revealed that the criminal network had been operating for at least 5 years and had been responsible for hundreds of deaths across the Western territories. The network's sophisticated communication and coordination systems had allowed it to operate largely undetected by local law enforcement agencies that lacked the resources and jurisdiction to investigate crimes that crossed territorial boundaries. The case had lasting implications for the development of forensic science and criminal investigation techniques. The systematic excavation and documentation of the underground chambers represented one of the first large-scale crime scene investigations in American history. The techniques developed during this investigation would be refined and expanded in later cases, contributing to the evolution of modern forensic methods. Detective Sullivan's team employed photographic documentation, systematic measurement and mapping of the crime scene, and careful preservation of physical evidence. These techniques were revolutionary for their time and established precedents that would influence criminal investigation procedures for decades to come. The investigation also pioneered the use of scientific analysis in criminal cases. The team employed chemical analysis to identify substances used to drug victims, anatomical examination to determine causes of death, and even early forms of ballistics analysis to match weapons to specific crimes. The Harwick case also influenced the development of victim advocacy and support services. The families of the murdered travelers organized to pressure authorities for better investigation procedures and to provide assistance to other families dealing with missing relatives. This early victim advocacy movement helped establish principles that would later be incorporated into modern victim services programs. The Victim Advocacy Group, led by the families of Dr. Blackwood and several other prominent victims, lobbied for federal legislation that would improve coordination between law enforcement agencies and establish standardized procedures for investigating missing persons cases. Their efforts contributed to the passage of several important laws that enhanced the federal government's ability to investigate crimes that crossed territorial and state boundaries. The advocacy group also established one of the first victim compensation funds in American history, providing financial assistance to families who had lost breadwinners to violent crime. This fund served as a model for similar programs that would be established in other states and territories. Modern criminologists who have studied the Harwick case Note several factors that made their operation particularly effective and dangerous. First was their use of a legitimate business as cover for their crimes, which provided natural explanations for the presence of strangers and the possession of various goods. Second was their exploitation of frontier hospitality traditions, which made travelers more likely to trust them and less likely to be suspicious of their motives. The family's collaborative approach to crime was also crucial to their success. Unlike many criminal enterprises where one individual dominates the others, the Harwicks operated as a true partnership, with each member contributing specialized skills that enhanced the effectiveness of their operations. This collaborative model made them far more dangerous than they would have been as individual criminals. Perhaps most importantly, the family understood the importance of patience and selectivity in choosing their victims. They didn't target every traveler who passed through their establishment, only those who met specific criteria for vulnerability and profitability. This restraint allowed them to operate for nearly 3 years without arousing serious suspicion, far longer than most serial killers manage to avoid detection. The psychological profiles of the family members, reconstructed from contemporary accounts and evidence, reveal a disturbing dynamic of shared psychopathy and mutual enablement. Unlike cases where one family member coerces others into criminal activity, the Harwicks appear to have embraced their roles willingly, each finding their own form of satisfaction in the suffering and death of their victims. Ezra's role as the strategic mastermind reflected a calculating intelligence that viewed human beings as commodities to be harvested for profit. His ability to maintain a facade of respectability while orchestrating mass murder demonstrates a level of compartmentalization that is characteristic of the most dangerous psychopaths. Mercy's participation in the medical aspects of their crimes suggests someone who derived satisfaction from wielding power over life and death. Her transformation of murder into a systematic business enterprise reveals a mind that had completely divorced itself from normal human empathy and moral constraints. Ruth's role as the family's intelligence gatherer required her to observe and assess potential victims with cold calculation, determining who would live and who would die based purely on practical considerations. Her ability to maintain her unremarkable facade while making these life-and-death decisions demonstrates a chilling level of emotional detachment. Jacob's use of his natural charm to lure victims to their deaths represents perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the family's operation. His ability to make people trust him while planning their murder reveals a form of predatory behavior that exploited the very qualities that make human society possible. Caleb's role as the family's enforcer, combined with his facade of simple-mindedness, allowed him to commit acts of violence while maintaining plausible deniability about his true nature. His ability to conceal his intelligence and cunning behind a mask of innocence made him particularly dangerous to unsuspecting victims. The case also highlights the particular vulnerabilities of frontier society that made such crimes possible. The sparse population, limited communication, and weak law enforcement that characterized the American West created opportunities for predators who understood how to exploit these conditions. The Harwick family's success demonstrates how criminal enterprises could thrive in environments where traditional social controls were weak or absent. The investigation of the Harwick crimes revealed the importance of professional law enforcement and systematic investigative techniques in solving complex criminal cases. The Pinkerton detectives' methodical approach and their willingness to follow evidence wherever it led contrasted sharply with the more casual investigative methods that were typical of frontier law enforcement. The case also demonstrated the value of interagency cooperation and information sharing in criminal investigations. The Pinkerton detectives' success was largely due to their ability to coordinate with local authorities and to access resources that were not available to individual sheriffs or marshals operating in isolation. The discovery of the Harwick family's crimes had a lasting impact on public attitudes toward crime and punishment in the American West. The systematic nature of their murders and their exploitation of frontier hospitality traditions challenged romantic notions about the inherent goodness of pioneer life and the effectiveness of frontier justice. The vigilante execution of the family, while understandable given the horror of their crimes, also raised troubling questions about the rule of law and the proper administration of justice. The fact that the family was killed before they could stand trial meant that many questions about their crimes and their potential accomplices were never answered. The case influenced popular culture and folklore in ways that persist to this day. The story of the murderous family who preyed on travelers became a staple of Western literature and later influenced countless books, movies, and television shows. However, many of these fictional adaptations have sensationalized or distorted the facts, creating a mythology that often obscures the historical reality. The site of the former Harwich trading post remained abandoned for many years after the family's death. The underground chambers were eventually sealed permanently, and the land was allowed to return to its natural state. Today, the location is marked only by a small historical marker that briefly describes the crimes without sensationalizing their details. The marker, installed by the Colorado Historical Society in 1952, reads simply, "Near this site stood the Harwich Trading Post, 1876-1878, scene of multiple murders during the territorial period, a reminder of the importance of law and order in civilized society." The understated language reflects a desire to acknowledge the historical significance of the location without glorifying the crimes that occurred there. The case continues to be studied by historians, criminologists, and law enforcement professionals as an example of early organized crime in America and the challenges of maintaining order in frontier society. Academic conferences and scholarly publications regularly feature papers analyzing various aspects of the case, from the family dynamics to the investigative techniques used. Recent scholarship has focused on the economic aspects of the Harwich family's crimes, particularly their involvement in the illegal trade in human remains. This aspect of their operation has been largely overlooked in popular accounts of the case, but it represents one of the earliest examples of organized trafficking in human body parts in American history. The Harwich family murders remain one of the most notorious cases in Colorado history, and a dark reminder of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of frontier society. Their crimes demonstrated that evil could flourish in the absence of effective law enforcement and community oversight, and that the very qualities that made frontier life possible, trust, hospitality, and mutual assistance, could be exploited by those with malicious intent. The case serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of vigilance and the need for strong institutions to protect society from predators. It reminds us that civilization is not a natural state, but must be actively maintained through the efforts of individuals and institutions working together for the common good. As we reflect on this dark chapter in American history, we are reminded that the frontier was not just a place of opportunity and adventure, but also a place where the absence of established institutions and social controls could create opportunities for those with evil intentions. The Harwich family took advantage of the trust and hospitality that were essential for survival in frontier communities, betraying those very qualities that made civilization possible. The legacy of the Harwich family murders extends beyond their immediate impact on frontier society. The case helped establish important precedents for criminal investigation, victim advocacy, and interagency cooperation that continue to influence law enforcement practices today. It also serves as a historical reminder of the challenges faced by those who sought to build civilization in the American wilderness. For modern travelers and students of history, the Harwich case offers sobering lessons about the dangers that can lurk behind facades of respectability and hospitality. It reminds us that evil can wear a friendly face, and that the most dangerous predators are often those who appear most trustworthy and helpful. The story of the Harwich family serves as a reminder that safety and security are not natural conditions, but must be actively maintained through the efforts of individuals and institutions working together for the common good. Their crimes shocked a nation and helped shape the development of criminal justice systems that we rely on today. In the end, the story of the Harwich family is not just about four individuals who chose evil over good, but about the broader challenges of building and maintaining civilization in difficult circumstances. It reminds us that the freedoms and opportunities that drew people to the frontier came with risks and responsibilities that required constant vigilance and community cooperation to manage effectively. The case of the Harwick family murders stands as one of the most chilling examples of how evil can flourish in the absence of effective law enforcement and community oversight. Their crimes serve as an enduring reminder of the importance of vigilance, community cooperation, and the rule of law in maintaining a civilized society. While the family members themselves met violent ends at the hands of vigilantes, their crimes continue to serve as a warning about the price of isolation and the importance of remaining alert to the dangers that can lurk behind even the most welcoming facades. Today, as we travel the modern highways that have replaced the old frontier trails, we can reflect on how far we have come in terms of safety and security. Yet the basic human vulnerabilities that the Harwick family exploited, our need for shelter, food, and human companionship, remain unchanged. The case serves as a reminder that we must remain vigilant against those who would exploit our basic humanity for their own evil purposes. The Harwick family's story continues to resonate because it touches on fundamental fears about trust, safety, and the thin line between civilization and chaos. Their ability to maintain a facade of respectability while committing unspeakable acts reminds us that evil can hide in plain sight, and that our safety depends not just on laws and institutions, but on the vigilance and courage of ordinary citizens who refuse to ignore the signs of danger.